Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bristol Community College. My name is Keith Tebow. I'm the Director of Television Services and also the Director of Fall River Community Media. And I want to welcome you to our U.S. Presidential Candidates Forum. Before we get started today and get into why we're here, I'd like to take a few moments and welcome for a few welcoming remarks the President of Bristol Community College, Dr. John Sprague. Dr. Sprague.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. This is a very important forum, a way to clarify the issues. Among all the presidential election years, I thought 1968 was the most tumultuous until this year. So I think it's a far distant second now, but it's very important. We have some wonderful people here, experts in the field, to clarify the issues for you. Please ask questions and comments. It's a very informative session that we're glad to host at Bristol Community College. This is part of our job, is to make information available and host these community as a community resource. So we host these community efforts, and good things will come out of it. Okay, so maybe sanity will be restored at a national level. They have a heavy responsibility. The panel has a heavy responsibility in that regard. But I want to get out of the way so we have much more time to hear from the experts. So thank you again for coming, and it's a pleasure for Bristol Community College to welcome you all to us. Thank you. Keith, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Our goal today is to conduct this event focusing on the policy issues that are facing the candidates in this campaign. As I've said on many occasions as we were promoting this and setting up this event, we want to make this event informational, not confrontational. I think those of you who have watched the presidential debates on the national level have seen enough confrontation maybe than we would like. We want to keep this as informational as possible. Let me introduce you now to our participants in alphabetical order based on the presidential candidate. First off, from the campaign of Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton, State Senator Mark Pacheco. Representing the campaign of Libertarian Party nominee Gary Johnson, Daniel Fishman. From the campaign of Green Party nominee Jill Stein, Ian Jackson. And from the campaign of Republican Party nominee Donald Trump, Kenneth Nassif. Now, the participants have been given a list of topics and questions which we hope to cover during today's forum. Our guests here today are not the candidates, and we want to make sure that they're prepared to share with you the views of their candidates on the issues that they face. Each representative will answer every question and will have 90 seconds to do so. We have a timekeeper in the front row here who will monitor the time during our forum. The order of who will answer the initial question first has been determined by draw, and that will be Senator Pacheco representing Hillary Clinton. We will then move left to right until all the participants answer the question. For our second question, we'll move down the line, so Mr. Fishman will answer the next question first, and then again go through the loop until everyone answers the question. And we'll continue in that order throughout the entire length of the forum. After a few rounds of questions, we will open the floor up to you to allow you to ask questions of these representatives. Now, I will be on the sideline during this part, and I will be holding this microphone. When you have a question, please raise your hand. Our moderator will recognize you, but please wait to ask the question until you get the microphone, because we do want to record this for our video to make sure your question is heard. At the end of the forum, each representative will have 90 seconds for a closing statement to provide their final pitch on why they feel their candidate should be the next president of the United States. Again, I'd like to thank Bristol Community College for hosting this event, and I'd also like to thank our staff of Fall River Community Media, who is here to provide the recording for this event. Also, because we want to raise the level of civility, as President Sprague had said, please, we ask you to keep any applause to a minimum and any outbursts to a minimum, as we want to hear from our representatives today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our moderator who will guide us throughout the forum. I'm pleased to announce BCC Professor of History and Government, Don Kilgus. Don?
Thank you very much, and welcome to the forum today. The first question for our panel is, this year, a passionately debated issue has been immigration and immigration reform. What is your candidate's views regarding this important issue? Senator Pacheco.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor, and let me thank my colleagues who have been selected by the other campaigns that have agreed to participate today, and to the BCC community. Let me thank you all for being here, in particular the student body that has joined us today. Hillary Clinton's position on immigration is that we need comprehensive immigration reform in this country. That we are stronger as a nation when we do things together. That we end up hurting ourselves as a country and around the world when we tear parents away from their children. She is very strong on making sure we have strong national security here at home. She wants to make sure that people that are felons and people that have broken the law do not stay here. She is for border security, but for those who are here, who have played by the rules, who have contributed to society, she also wants to see, as John McCain once did, working with Ted Kennedy, a pathway to citizenship. She is for comprehensive immigration reform. She wants to see us be stronger together.
Thank you, Senator Pacheco. Mr. Fishman.
Governor Johnson, as the governor of a border state in New Mexico, has a real understanding of the immigration issues that are facing us. And when we talk about immigration, we're talking about the same derived history that every person in this room has, because we all came here or our relatives came here. And what we recognize is that the people who make the best American citizens are the people who want to work, because that is the promise of America, that through hard work, you can better yourself. Through hard work, you can rise up and create a wonderful future for your family. So we want to make sure that the people who come to this country and want to work can. Now, we're not talking about citizenship for everybody, but we're talking about people who pass our process in terms of the people who want to come into this country, that we make sure that you're safe, that you're not a radical driven towards terrorism, that you are not a criminal in your own country. But if you want to come to this country and you want to work, we should be issuing work permits. Those are the people who should be coming into our country right now. The idea that we are going to chase down the 12 million undocumented who live in this country right now and deport them, that is a terroristic option. The idea that we are going to instill fear into our own citizens, instead what we need to do is to find a way to say, we recognize that what has always been best about the American system is our shared reserve of intellect and our shared ability to put our shoulder to the wheel. When we have people who want to come into our country and put their shoulder to the wheel, we should welcome them. On the Statue of Liberty, it says, "Give me your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to be free." America represents that idea of freedom like nowhere else. And when there are people who are seeking freedom, we want them to come to the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Jackson, please.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming and their participation, listening, trying to be informed, or whether it's for credit. Now, here, close by in Plymouth, some Native Americans are soon going to observe a day of mourning for their past struggles of their ancestors and honor the current struggles that Native people have, whether it's a pipeline trying to go across their land in North Dakota because some other people didn't want it. Oops, we'll just move it. What we need is to restore the ideal of the first Thanksgiving, which was everyone coming together, Native and immigrant, and welcome everyone, and create a welcoming environment around the world and build a world where people can live together in peace.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Nazif, please.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank the entire BCC community for hosting this event and for inviting us here, and particularly the students that are here present. Immigration, I think, was first brought to the forefront by Donald Trump himself. And whether we like to admit it or not, we have a horrible immigration system in this country. We have criminal immigrants, illegal immigrants running around the country. They're getting caught, then they're being released. We have sanctuary cities that are protecting these people. Sure, a comprehensive immigration reform plan espoused by the Hillary folks is a great thing. But what is her comprehensive plan? She wants open borders. She has said so behind closed doors in front of Wall Street bankers and other people. Donald Trump wants America first. He realizes that illegal immigration is a threat and a danger to all of us, to you, to me, to our families. We are a country of immigrants, and we understand that. My great-grandparents came here in the late 1800s or whatever it was. We accept the American way, but Hillary Clinton wants to bring in more than 500,000 illegal, undocumented refugees from Syria, and no doubt many of them are tied to Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That certainly is obviously a very important issue for us all to consider in this election. The second question that I would like you to please address, and we'll be starting with Mr. Fishman on this question, is since 9/11, there has been a debate within the United States regarding how to balance the need to keep Americans safe at home and protect civil liberties while being attentive to foreign and homegrown threats. What is your candidate's stance regarding homeland security/terrorism?
One of the important things that we should realize is that when we talk about the Bill of Rights, we are talking about your rights. We are not talking about civil liberties that are granted to you by government. We are talking about your rights that belong to you. And first and foremost among those is your freedom of speech. Number four, Fourth Amendment, is your right to be free of unreasonable search and seizure. Now, we know, because of the actions of Edward Snowden, that the American government was listening to phone calls of American citizens, reading the emails of American citizens without a warrant. We have a process that we know that protects us. We have a law enforcement agency, we have a Federal Bureau of Investigation, we have a Central Intelligence Agency. The idea that we have to compromise the rights of Americans is balderdash. Frankly, there is a way that they can read your email or listen to your phone calls. They have to go to a judge and explain to a judge why there is a necessity for your rights, not liberties granted to you by the government, but your rights, for them to violate your rights. Now, if they can explain it to a judge and they can ask for that, then yes, of course, there's a reason to do it. And there's a legitimate reason all the time. But we have to remember that security and liberty are on a balance scale. And if we are going to emphasize security, liberty goes away. We have to find that right balance. And that right balance was written for us in a guide in the Constitution. No unreasonable searches. That's what the Johnson campaign represents in terms of our idea of how to deal with foreign threats and terrorism.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jackson.
Is an interest in history a reason for a special screening? Back in 1990s, when I was living in France, I kind of started there with less than regular documentation to work. I had an Egyptian visa on my passport. I was brought aside and said, "Why did you go to Egypt?" To be interested in the monuments, of course. We also have a long history of this. What did Benjamin Franklin say when between liberty and security? Someone that's going to give up a little liberty for security deserves neither. This isn't a new discussion. We had troops stationed in our homes by foreign powers. That's why it was established in the Constitution. We must, and it was adopted after, because these rights weren't in the original document. We must stop this security state and tackle the real problem and give those people hope that are starving in refugee camps around the world.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nassif.
Well, when we talk about security for America, we cannot exclude the issue that we addressed briefly, which is immigration. Because the greatest threat to our security, whether we like to say it or not, and unfortunately, the words cannot pass the lips of Hillary Clinton nor President Obama. Radical Islamic terrorism. This is a war. They are trying to kill us. They are trying to come to America and take over America with a caliphate. We have to admit this. We are at war with these barbarians. And that is the most serious threat facing America today. Now, maybe Mr. Obama or Mrs. Clinton think global warming is, but I sure don't. And what do we do about it? Well, we're at war with an enemy that seeks our total destruction. This is a war. We can't go to courthouses every day of the week looking for subpoenas or for search warrants to search a mosque. We need intensive intelligence and security nationally concerning all illegal aliens that are in this country and all folks who pose a threat. The other side of our problem with security is lack of respect for police. Law and order has to come first. And unfortunately, Black Lives Matter has created a serious problem in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Pacheco.
Thank you very much. Let me just begin by saying that my colleague, Mr. Nassif, had referenced earlier that Hillary Clinton talked about open borders, that she believes in open borders. That is absolutely not correct. Anybody who watched the debate last evening would have heard Hillary Clinton say when she was talking about open borders, she was talking about the energy market in North America, so that we can trade energy back and forth across the so-called borders. But obviously, you need to have the grid going back and forth across the border. So she was not talking about immigration. Hillary Clinton's comprehensive plan to defeat ISIS and the threat of radical jihadism. Now, the Trump campaign would say she has a hard time saying something like radical jihadism. I just read that from the website, radical jihadism. First, we need to protect our homeland, including by surging our intelligence to ensure that law enforcement has the information and the tools they need to work here at home. Secondly, we need to work with our allies to dismantle the global network that supplies money, arms, propaganda, fighters, and terrorists that are out there. And third, we have to take terrorists plotting against us off the battlefield. It was Hillary Clinton that was in the Situation Room when we brought Osama bin Laden to justice.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. The third question or topic that we'd like to address, and Mr. Jackson, if you would please start, is in regards to the economy. What is your candidate's plan to help spur job creation in the United States?
Well, there's not just a job problem in the United States, there's a job problem in Fall River. There are plenty of places that are old warehouses that you could put green energy, start manufacturing jobs. We had an awful situation, and still do to some degree, with air quality because of the coal plants. Now we have one that is going to close down, but we need to have clean, green jobs, and we also need to get people to work, find work for our soldiers that return from service. We also, with an all-volunteer service, need to make sure that all the jobs are well-paying, so that if someone wants to volunteer for their country, it's not because they're starving, but it's because of patriotism. We have the wisdom to find work for everyone in this country. We've done it We did it during the Depression. We can do it again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nassif.
Well, I think, and I think Donald Trump's been pretty clear on this, the lack of jobs, I think, are a result of a couple of factors. First of all, obviously, the economy. Our economy is in terrible shape, and it's been in terrible shape for nearly 8 years now. And I don't see any changes if Hillary Clinton is elected. I just see another Obama administration for the next 4 years, or God forbid, the next 8 years. We are losing jobs to factories and companies that are moving overseas. And the reason they're going overseas or into Mexico is because they are buried with all types of administrative regulations imposed upon them by the Obama administration. It's almost impossible for a corporation to stay in this country, earn sufficient funds to hire enough people so that they can go to work and be paid a decent salary. We need to get rid of most of these regulations and bring these companies back to the United States. And we should impose some type of tariff or fine on American companies that produce products in a foreign country and attempt to bring them back into this country. In addition to that, Donald Trump has proposed a income tax plan that I think will give a lot of relief, particularly to middle-class families, and hopefully during the course of this discussion today, we'll have time to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Pacheco.
Thank you. Let me just say that one of the campaigns that is shipping jobs overseas is that of Donald Trump, shipping his ties that are made, other types of apparel that is being made. And there are types of clothing and other types of things that we can do in manufacturing and advanced manufacturing. One of the major shirt manufacturers is doing business right here in southeastern Massachusetts, and they do so on an international market. So we can do this, and Hillary Clinton wants to put forth in her first 100 days a jobs plan for America, a jobs plan that would create literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs all across this great country of ours that would be at the level of the Eisenhower administration with the national highway system to get into the infrastructure. We here in southeastern Massachusetts know very well what we need here in terms of South Coast Rail and investment in rail, airports, highways, etc. She wants to be a partner at the federal level for the first time in a long time, and there's a tremendous opportunity for bipartisanship on this issue to create jobs, investing in our future, and to think about and understand climate and science, and actually agree with science, and invest in a clean energy future for the rest of this 21st century.
Thank you. Mr. Fishman.
Governor Johnson famously said, "My 2 dogs have created more shovel-ready jobs in this administration." And there's a reality to that the solution that the Johnson Weld campaign represents is different from everybody up here. Because what Johnson and Weld represent is the idea that government has never created a job. The way a job gets created is an entrepreneur or a business owner understands that by hiring one more person, he may be able to make more money. He has an incentive to hire more people. So if we have an environment in which businesses think that they will grow, there will be more jobs. But another important thing that happens, and is happening more and more this generation, is that people are finding ways to work for themselves. The best example of that is Uber. And if anybody's used Uber in Massachusetts, you know it is amazing. It's so much better than the taxi system ever was. So what happened when this system came along where people could decide that they want to work for themselves for 2 hours, right? A mother could drop her kids off at school and drive around for 2 hours. The government decided they were going to regulate it, even though it was functioning perfectly. So now Uber drivers have to pay a tax. And even though they pay a tax on owning their car, they pay a tax on the person that they pick up, they pay a tax on the gasoline that they buy, they pay a tax on their cell service that they use to navigate around. Massachusetts Democrats have decided to put another 20-cent tax on top of that to support the new ride-sharing department, and a 5-cent tax to modernize the taxi fleet. When government gets involved in jobs like that, that does not create an environment that is going to make more jobs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For our fourth question, I just want to give the audience a chance to also think that after this fourth question that I'm going to pose to the panel, I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience has a question. So please give some thought to that, and then Keith will come around with the microphone. The fourth question, and this will be Mr. Nassif, if you would begin, please, is since we're here at Bristol Community College, what is your candidate's plan to help make higher education more affordable and more accessible for all Americans?
Well, Donald Trump has spoken about higher education, and he's been very frank about it. This concept of free education for everybody is a myth and a dream. So let's take that off the table. He is in favor of low-interest loans. He is in favor of allowing graduates of universities to pay off their loan in service to our country by various programs. And he is in favor of universities and colleges lowering their tuition rates, which are far, far beyond the pale. University presidents are receiving $500,000 or more in a salary. That's where the cost for students to go to school go. So a lot of these expenses should be reduced. Colleges should be open and more available to more students, and there should be ingenious ways that they can pay back their student loans aside from trying to get a job when there are no jobs. When Donald Trump becomes president, there will be jobs for graduates of colleges and for graduates of professional colleges, people with advanced degrees. Right now, unfortunately, the problem is graduates of colleges cannot get jobs to pay back their student loans. So it's a never-ending problem. This is related to what we talked about before. It all goes back to the economy. So let us hope that when Donald Trump is elected, the economy will change and all of our lives will be improved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Pacheco.
Thank you very much. When we look at Hillary's plan for America relative to higher education, we talk about a new college compact in America where all students would receive help so that we would have debt-free college, where in public higher education, in community college, such as BCC, and the university system, the state university system, that we would have four-year schools, students from families with incomes of $125,000 or less would have free tuition and fees at community colleges for students of all incomes, and helps those students graduate debt-free, low, middle-income students who are eligible for Pell Grants and receive in additional help for free tuition benefits. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders were the two candidates that started talking about targeting the need for affordability in higher education in America. Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton worked together to put this new college compact forward. I would urge you to go to hillaryclinton.com so you can read every detail of that plan. I can guarantee you it is much better than Trump University.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Fishman.
With the best of all possible intentions, government injected itself into the college education market because they thought people should go to college. That will improve their lives. The problem was that people couldn't afford to go to college, so the government said, you know what, we're going to have guaranteed student loans. And what we're going to do is we're going to take away one of your rights that's supposed to be guaranteed to you, the idea that you can declare bankruptcy and walk away from your debts. But if anybody here has student loans, you know you cannot declare bankruptcy and walk away from your student debts. So what happened? Banks suddenly realized anybody who wants to go to college, we should give them a loan because they have to pay us back no matter what. The government said so. So suddenly there's a mountain of money available for people who want to go to college. Colleges said, my goodness, there's a mountain of money. How do we transfer it from the banks through the students into our coffers? We do that by offering more and more classes. So in reality, there's a lot more college classes out there that may or may not help you to find a job, but the college doesn't care because you pay them. The bank is guaranteed that you have to pay them back. You have lost one of your critical rights. The way that we should be funding college education is to not have any government intervention. If you could declare bankruptcy, then of course, you're going to say, this is my way of saying whether or not the college education I got was worth it. Why don't we have a situation in which the colleges lend money to the students? So you, the students, become investments for the college and the university. So the college wants to make sure that you get a degree so that you are going to be able to pay them back. Make the colleges want you to succeed rather than thinking of you as part of their paycheck.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson.
I grew up in a mill town in Maine. I'm a bit older than the students and many of the voters. Older than my friend Sean that's in the back here. But there was a choice of a manufacturing job in that mill town. But it's a dream world to think that without college education that you can get a job as an administrative assistant. That's why Dr. Stein believes that we need to guarantee a tuition and fee-free. For you college students, I do have a son, so I know that fees are rather high too. That we need to guarantee that. Now the student loan interest, which we've heard about, that's been kept high by law. It's not guaranteeing it for the students, as my colleague, Mr. Fishman said, it's guaranteeing it for the banks. Would a businessman have been brilliant if he couldn't go bankrupt and get rid of the loans 4 times? I don't think so. So we need to abolish student debt and free our new generation from debt servitude.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to open it up to the audience, and please just to remind the audience that the question, please make sure that it's an informational question to allow our representatives to present the views of their candidate appropriately. So please, any questions from the audience, please? Keith will be there in one moment.
Good morning. I think we would all agree that the essence of our Republican form of government is a properly elected chief executive. What was extremely troublesome to me last night was that specifically Mr. Trump began to scapegoat the process. He began to scapegoat the electoral system, our electoral system, and he called it rigged. First of all, I would like to know if any of you, in fact, agree with this statement, because this deals with the honesty of our electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Senator Pacheco, you're first, please.
Well, I absolutely do not agree with that statement. And actually, when you look at the comments that are being made nationally prior to the debate about Mr. Trump's statement of a rigged system, people like Marco Rubio came out and said that was absolutely ridiculous, talking about the rigged system. Many of the states in the United States are actually managed at the state level by Republican governors and Republican members of the administration that are running the electoral system. So if somebody wanted to be, skeptical at all about the system, they would probably be looking at it in the other way, in the other direction, that maybe there's a lot more rigging that could go on for the GOP. But both Democrats and Republicans and unenrolled voters, independents across the board have been coming out this week saying that these statements are just unfounded. It's not the case at all. There's more problems in our electoral system in terms of making sure people have access to the ballot box, not once the ballots have been cast that there's problems there.
Thank you, Senator Pacheco. Mr. Fishman.
One of the problems with the old parties is that when they talk about the idea of the election being rigged, they're already talking about a game that they have controlled from beginning to end. I represent a candidate who is on the ballot in all 50 states and in the District of Columbia, who is polling at 10% in polls that only call landlines. That means your generation, millennials, you are not being represented in finding out who is actually polling at the magical 15% to be on the debate stage. You've seen me here. You've heard what I have to say. I represent a candidate who is not an extremist. I represent a candidate who has ideas that you've never heard before. But the fact of the matter is that the old parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, control the Committee on Presidential Debates. And as a result, you have been bamboozled into thinking that there are only two legitimate choices for you for president. I and my colleague up here represent candidates who could absolutely win enough electoral votes to become president. We also represent candidates who can deny either one of these candidates from getting the 270 votes required to become president, at which point in time, the election goes through to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives will determine it. So if we talked about a rigged election and the sanctity of what happens in the ballot box, I have no particular question about that. But if you talk about who got to debate and whose ideas you heard, let me ask you this. Did you hear everything, every debate, every position that's being made by a candidate who's on the ballot in all 50 states last night? Did you hear that in any of the debates? By what criteria do the Republicans and the Democrats, the old parties, get to decide that you can't hear from a libertarian or a green or an independent? And that is a rigged system.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson.
Well, I've got news for everyone. Life is not completely fair. Yes, money will get you media attention. And in some ways, that's a struggle of the new parties but life is not fair. But I've met Secretary Galvin. As a new party, I find it offensive to say that he would try to rig the election. He certainly did a pretty lousy job rigging the election for governor this past time, if that was his intention. But you also had Democrats win statewide office. So now, with the Constitution, with the Electoral College, obviously had plans for at least 4 candidates, because when it goes to the House, at least 4, because it says the top 3 will go to the House. So let's stop with thinking that there only needs to be 2 parties. There's space for everything, and that was in the founders. In fact, they warned about completely dividing in 2 diverse camps.
Thank you. Mr. Nazif.
Well, the system is rigged, and Donald Trump is right. What do we mean by rigged? That's the point. You have a situation here where the mainstream media is working for Hillary Clinton to become elected president. I call that rigged. You have a situation, and I invite you all to go to Project Veritas, Veritas. Look it up in YouTube. If you want, before I leave, give me your emails and I'll give you a link to it. Project Veritas, which came out 2 days ago, is an expose of these radical leftists who are being paid money from the DNC, who are getting money from the Clinton campaign. And their job is to go out and foment disruption, to cause people waiting in line at Trump events to get into fights. Mr. Scott Foval, F-O-V-A-L, clearly admits what they are doing. He's working with a Mr. Bob Creamer, who admitted on tape that they bus people to other states, put them in rented cars so that they can commit voter fraud. This is what we call by a rigged system. So yes, the system is rigged. I'll say one thing, if Donald Trump wins this election, he'll say the system is not rigged. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have another question from the audience, please? Anyone that has a question that they'd like the representatives of each of the candidates to address, please? Question? Thank you.
Hi there. as a young person, I'm really, really concerned about climate change, and I really don't think we're talking about it nearly enough. So I am wondering what each one of your candidates think about climate change, what you're going to do about climate change, and where you come down on issues like offshore drilling and fracking.
Okay, thank you very much. First person, Mr. Fishman, please.
One of the important issues when we talk about climate change is when we talk about what is the intervention that we are going to require to address climate change. If you look at the science, you look at the temperature graphs, it is clear that the Earth is warming. Is it 100% clear that humans are causing it? I think the evidence indicates that that's likely. The question becomes, what level of government intervention will I support? If you have a car that is polluting above a certain level, should the government come and take that away from you? If you have a house in which you heat it by burning wood, should the government come and tell you, no, you can't burn wood because wood is not carbon neutral? Wood actually gives off a lot of carbon when you burn it. Some of these regulations have been proposed. You remember the cash for clunker system, in which the government said, you know what, we're going to offer a lot of money and we're going to buy up old cars and we're going to take them off the market, and that's going to be good for the environment. But what actually happened was the used car market went away, and middle-class families no longer were able to buy cheap used cars. Government intervention, with the best of intentions, always has unintended consequences. You and I, we're concerned about the environment. We can make choices with our wallet. I heat my house on 100% renewables. I use electricity that comes from hydro. I use wood. I use sources of fuel that I think are acceptable. I make decisions in my personal life so that I can support a green environment. But I would never dream of saying that the government should use the police to force you to make green decisions in your personal life.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Jackson, please.
Well, I have this bottle of water here. You see that it's full. You wouldn't suggest that I take any of my colleagues' water and try and put it in to that same bottle. What if I put it behind something and you can't see how full it is? Should I pour more water into it? You don't know. Now, some of us have more science background. Dr. Stein believes that we need to start moving off of fossil fuels, not down the road. We don't need little bridges. Now, why do we all have gas cars? It turns out that Mr. Edison talked to Ford and they decided instead of battery power, in a twist of fate, we'd use gas. Now the Rockefeller Foundation, they're behind Standard Oil, they're divesting. If it's good enough for the Rockefellers, I think it might be a good plan for the rest of us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nazif.
Well, I have to say, on the scale of issues affecting or threatening our country, global warming is not at the top. That's not to say it's not an issue to be considered, and it's not to say that something should be done about it. Of course, we're all for green energy. In a perfect world, we'd have perfect air, we'd have no pollution, but that's not the reality. What good is it to worry about global warming if you're dead? What good is it if people who are out to kill us come to America, create cells, and commit mass murder on large scales? What good, what is the sense of worrying about global warming at that level? I think our priorities must change in the next administration, and I think global warming, of course, will be something we will consider as we have in the past. And I think the Environmental Protection Agency is one agency that should take responsibility for that, perhaps in a different point of view, with less regulations that amount to nothing. And I hope in the future, quite frankly, we can drive cars that are electric-driven as opposed to gasoline-driven. I hope that day comes while I'm still alive. But again, global warming, I believe, is not a main concern at this time in America.
Thank you. Senator Pacheco.
I believe that global warming is one of the most important issues we're facing in our lifetime, and certainly the most important issue that we're facing relative to the future of the 21st century, not only here in America, but in the world. That's why I became an Al Gore climate messenger, where I was actually trained by Al Gore on climate messaging. That's why I've led the way in the Massachusetts State Senate to not only cut back on CO2 emissions in our climate, but at the same time, not only protecting the environment, but creating jobs. As a result of what we've done here in Massachusetts, which is just one example as to what can be done with a president that actually believes in science, we created an $11 billion clean energy industry here in Massachusetts. That is exactly what Hillary Clinton wants to do nationally. She wants to get off of fossil fuels. She wants to embrace a clean energy future. She wants to make sure that we create the jobs that go along with it. As a matter of fact, one of her plans, and again, I would urge you to go to hillaryclinton.com, it looks at installing 500 million solar panels by the end of Hillary's first term and generating enough clean energy to power every home in the United States of America within the decade. That's the type of vision and commitment that she has to a clean energy future.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? Yes.
Now, I'm a history major, and one of my mentors is actually in this class, and he asked a question. It was actually Professor Holman. You guys all made comments concerning about terrorism, both domestic and foreign. While things have been happening in that part of the world since the cross and the moon first collided over 1,000 years ago, what are all of your candidates' stances when it comes to terrorism, both domestic and foreign, when most terrorist attacks don't occur on American soil but happen to our allies across the world?
Okay, thank you. So it's a little bit of a twist, a little bit on one of the questions in terms of what would your candidate stance be, again, related to terrorism, especially as it's abroad and on our allies, whether it be in France or Germany or other countries abroad? Okay, thank you. The first person to begin, please, would be Mr. Jackson.
Well, my daughter lives in France and is going to school in France and hopes to go off to Germany to finish and get a master's. So and actually, after the Nice attacks, I got a call saying, "Oh, Dad, don't worry. I'm now in Paris." Well, I didn't really know she was in Nice. You know how college students are. They don't always tell parents their exact position, and you don't want the tracking system. We need to make hope for everyone. We need to attack the problem. The problem is we have a wide divide between the rich and the poor in many countries. Now, that cuts it down. This bin Laden was from a rich family and was able to hire people to do his bidding because they had no hope. The key is to give people hope for a better future. When you have hope, then you have aspirations. With aspirations, you can have success and build your family or whatever lifestyle you choose to have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nassif.
Well, if I understand the question, it has to do with the international terrorism all over the place, not just America. I think it's safe to say, correct to say, that under President Obama and Secretary Clinton, terrorism and ISIS has expanded unbelievably for the last 8 years. And I put the blame squarely on their shoulders. International terrorism is something we're going to be battling for decades and decades. And the only way we're going to be successful is if we work with our allies and instead of leading from behind, lead from the front And wherever we find international terrorism, it must be eliminated, no matter what it takes. Unfortunately, we can't do this right now because of Obama's leadership with the help of Secretary Clinton. Our enemies are emboldened, and our friends don't trust us anymore. So the time has come to take action where international terrorism exists by working with the free nations of the world, by committing ourselves to leading them in this fight to extinguish the barbarians on this earth who seek to kill us. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Pacheco.
Extinguish the barbarians in the world that seek to kill us. Right after I heard last night and in previous statements from candidate Trump about giving nuclear power to other countries in the world, so we would have increased nuclear proliferation. That's exactly the wrong direction, unless we want to actually have happen what we just heard. What we need to do, and I think the question was quite thought-provoking, because it correctly stated that we have had problems with terrorism going all the way back in time. And it has a lot to do with the underlying issues relative to what is happening in economies that promote terrorism. That's one of the things I would agree with one of my colleagues on. We need to work, as Hillary Clinton would say, utilizing smart power, working with leaders, coming up with common goals with our allies. I can tell you, I talk with a lot of people in Europe every week. I have talked to people in Asia. They are scared to death about what the outcome of this election could be. And so I would urge you, again, go to hillaryclinton.com. She has a whole plan for this issue that deals a lot with technology as well, and working with a lot of the technology companies and our allies.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Fishman.
I'm viewing this as sort of an actual foreign policy question. The idea is, what would foreign policy look like under a Johnson administration? One of the important things that Gary Johnson talks about is we want to engage in diplomacy to the hilt. We want to absolutely make sure that we are exhausting every possible avenue of negotiation with people, and make sure that we understand that when we inject force into the world, more force exists to come back towards us. And so our idea of where we actually intervene, when we send troops, when we are willing to kill other people, we have to recognize that that is a decision that we should not make because we want to benefit American oil companies abroad. It shouldn't be a decision that we make because we want to support a military-industrial complex that has been giving money to Republican and Democratic candidates since the 50s. It should be a decision that we make because American lives are directly in jeopardy. That becomes a very different equation when you talk about it, and something that represents a difference between the Johnson administration and the old party's administration, the old party stance on foreign policy. The old parties are actually advocating for an active interventionist system where they support military bases around the world. Why do we have a giant military base in Germany? Why do we have a giant military base in Japan? Why are we spending your taxpayer money to support these systems? We should absolutely be engaged in diplomacy. We have a method in the United Nations that we can resolve things by talking. What we need to do is have a foreign policy that is predicated on the idea that violence is absolutely our last resort.
Okay, thank you very much. And what we'd like to do, so we have enough time for closing remarks from each of the representatives, what I'd like to do is pose one last question and then give you about a minute or so we'll cut it back from about 90 seconds to about a minute each to answer this question, and then we'll go to closing remarks. Almost every day, we see in the news an issue related to gun violence in the United States. What is your candidate's plan to tackle this complicated issue, which includes related issues such as gun control or mental health or those areas. And I know, again, I apologize for cutting a little bit shorter, but we wanted to make sure you have enough time for closing remarks as well. So if we could begin, please, with Mr. Nassif.
Well, as you know, Donald Trump is a firm supporter of the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. He's been endorsed by the NRA. That's not to say that guns should be given to everybody willy-nilly. The word gun control is a very confusing or deceiving word. We have gun control, particularly in a state like Massachusetts. You just can't go out and get a gun. You have to apply for it. You have to show it and demonstrate that you're proficient in the use of firearms. And it's still a question of whether or not the local authority will grant you the ability or a permit to purchase a gun. And most states have similar rules. Look at Chicago. Chicago has probably the strictest gun laws in the nation, and there are more people being killed by guns every night in that city than any other city in the country. And as is often said, when guns are outlawed, only the outlaws are going to have guns. Donald Trump supports the Second Amendment, but at the same time, he agrees that mentally ill people, people that are not qualified to handle guns, should never touch a gun.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pacheco. Senator Pacheco, excuse me.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Hillary Clinton believes in the Second Amendment. She said that last evening in the debate. She also believes there is not only a constitutional right to bear arms, but that there is also the ability to regulate those bearing arms, so that we can have in place regulations that deal with mental health, regulations that deal with, for example, the no-fly list that we have, where we know somebody might be on a terrorist watch list. They're in America. We know that, and yet they're able to buy a gun in many states in the United States of America. That's where she feels as though we need to focus, because there are people being killed every day of the week because of not having some of these protections. If you can save a few lives, it's important to try to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Fishman.
I believe in gun control. I want people to control their guns. I don't want criminals to have guns. I don't know how to stop them. They don't seem to follow the law. We're faced with the fact that there is indeed a crisis of violence in our society, but we have to recognize that most of the violence that is getting injected into our society that we see right now is coming from the fact that we have laws that are restricting people's liberty, and people object to that. If you look at what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, that is a legitimate complaint where people understand that the police, in many respects, have been acting as an oppressive force, and they are doing so in a discriminatory manner. We have to recognize the fact that there is an idea of due process, and we are all entitled to it, and that covers everything that you have guaranteed to you in the Constitution, including your Second Amendment rights. So although we might have an idea that we want to control how people have guns, we have to recognize that the Second Amendment is a right that is guaranteed to you. It is not a civil liberty granted to you by the government. And so your rights should not be restricted because the government has an idea that you might be dangerous.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Jackson.
Well, we've talked about the Second Amendment. It says because a well-regulated militia is necessary for a free state. Those of you that are studying history, I'm sure, can look. But what is the cause of this violence? Massachusetts doesn't have a Green Party. It has a Green Rainbow Party. It was formed with the Greens and Mel King's Rainbow Coalition. We need to learn to love each other. When my father was a pastor down in New Jersey, there were some issues. The white students came to the chief of police and said, we want to kill some black people. So the chief of police said, go see Pastor Jackson. He'll help you out. So they formed a list of demands. Their list of demands were that everybody would be treated equally. Strangely, the blacks had the same demand. That's how we're going to end violence, loving each other.
Okay, thank you very much. For our closing remarks, what we'd like to do is we'll begin with Senator Pacheco. It happens to be his turn to go first as well. And we'd like to begin the closing remarks as a final pitch, if you will, for each of the candidates, perhaps something that we don't already know about the candidates as you try to leave your final thoughts with the audience, both in person here and online and through the cable system. Senator Pacheco, please. And you'll have 90 seconds, by the way. You'll have 90 seconds for each response.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am here representing Hillary Clinton, not only because I believe in the policies that she has submitted to us as Americans to consider her candidacy, but because I happen to know her personally. I have read a lot about Hillary Clinton, and I see a lot about Hillary Clinton out there. And most of what I have read, in particular some of the criticisms, are the development of a caricature of a person that I don't know. I want you to know that I see her as someone that is unbelievably prepared to be president. She will do a great job for us as President of the United States. She has the unique experience to do the job well. There's a lot of people that say this is the most important election of our lifetime, and when we talk about the other parties as well, I couldn't agree more. And I want to leave you with this one example as to why it's important, and I reach out to the students here right now when I say this. A few years ago, there was an election. People were concerned about clean money in politics, getting dirty money out of politics, and people voted for a third party in a lot of areas in America on that election. Al Gore did not win that election as a result. George W. Bush became president. He appointed the people on the Supreme Court, and that Supreme Court gave us Citizens United. Don't let that happen again with women's rights and everything else that's on the ballot that day. All of these issues are on the ballot on November 8th. I ask you to vote for Hillary Clinton, who will do an outstanding job for America. Please go to hillaryclinton.com.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Fishman.
Could not have made my day more to have this guy say, don't vote for a third-party candidate, because that's the control that's in the system right now. They don't want your vote represented. They don't want you to vote your conscience. And the reality of it is that the old parties have this idea that politics is a number line. And to the right of the Republicans, and beyond that is the state controlling everything. And to the left is the Democrats, and beyond that is, to the right of the Republicans, corporations controlling everything. To the left, Democrats, beyond that, the state controlling everything. But politics is not a right and left number line. It's three-dimensional. That third direction is up. That is the direction of personal liberty. Cannabis, that's not a right or a left issue. That's a personal liberty issue. Do you have the right, as a responsible person, to smoke marijuana? That has nothing to do with right or left. That's up to you. That's liberty. Same-sex marriage, that's not a right or a left issue. And I want to remind you, the last time when Clinton was in the White House, they made same-sex marriage illegal when they passed the Defense of Marriage Act. We talk about right and left. I want you to stand up. Martin Luther King said that a man cannot ride your back unless it's bent. He said that while he was in jail. Okay? This is a man who was out there fighting for liberty, for your personal rights. And he recognized that for liberty, all we have to do is be willing to stand up. The Johnson Weld campaign is asking you to stand up this election, to vote your conscience. Think about the fact that you were not allowed to see them on the debate page. You were not allowed to see them on the debate stage. What I need you guys to do is go out, Google Gary Johnson. Find out that, I hope I did a good job of representing Governor Johnson here, but when you hear his words from him personally, you are going to understand that the reason why they tell you not to vote for third-party candidates is because millennials understand that the old parties have left them behind. Libertarianism, the new parties, We represent the future. We represent every one of you in here. Please, Google Gary Johnson. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson.
I joined the Green Rainbow Party because of my son, who, when he was going to school, the university wasn't paying him minimum wage for what they wanted him to do. Jill Stein came out there. Now, I'm glad to hear that the senator believes that that Jill's going to get the 20% vote, or maybe Mr. Johnson, and carry Massachusetts. I'm glad that they believe that's going to happen. Now, Dr. Stein and Barack Obama are candidates running on the 4 pillars of the Green Party: ecology, and understanding that all things are interconnected. Anything that we do to the web of life, we do to ourselves. Social and racial justice. Economic and political things that are concentrated lead to centralization. We need to decentralize the creation of wealth. Democracy, the idea that you should have the ability to influence the decisions that affect you. Nonviolence. We are calling for a nonviolent revolution to control the things that affect us. However, we recognize the right of self-defense and the need to protect others. A commitment to ecology, social justice, democracy, nonviolence are American values. If you believe these values, you're already a Green. Vote your values.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Nassif.
Oh, thank you. I think that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama together are the worst Secretary of State and the worst president that this country has ever had. Now, if you like the administration and what they've accomplished for the last 8 years, then you should vote for Hillary Clinton, because you'll get 4 more years of the same. 95 million Americans are out of the labor force today. We've got the lowest labor participation rate since the 1970s. We are experiencing the worst economic recovery since the 1940s. We have the lowest home ownership rate in 51 years. 7 in 10 Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. There are 12 million more Americans on food stamps today than before Obama took office. Of that, there has been a 58% increase in black Americans on food stamps since Obama became president. There are 8 million more Americans in poverty than there were before Obama took office. Obama is the only president in American history to never reach the 3% GDP growth. 1 in 5 American families do not have a single family member in the workforce. 1 in 6 American men, 18 to 34 years of age, are either in jail or out of work and living in their parents' basement. If you want more of that, then you can vote for Hillary Clinton. But I think the time has come that we should move in a different direction. Please go to donaldjtrump.com for more information. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all our representatives, please. Can we have a round of applause for all our representatives? Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for attending here in person, and everyone who's been watching online or on cable. I hope you found it to be enlightening and an interesting forum. And also, I would encourage all of you to please check out all of the websites for each of the 4 candidates, and please don't forget to vote on November 8th. Thank you again.
Nice to see you. Pleasure to meet you.